In the autumn of 2020, the world had been in lockdown long enough that most people had stopped counting the days. The tours had stopped. The concert halls were dark. The festivals had been canceled or postponed into a future that nobody could accurately calculate. The machinery of live music, the trucks and the road crews and the sound engineers and the venue managers and the 1,000 invisible people who make the visible thing possible had been parked, mothballed, suspended in a silence that was economic and practical and, for the people who had built their lives around it, also something more than that. Bonnie Tyler was at home in Wales. She had been at home in Wales for months, as most people had been at home in their own particular versions of Wales, learning the specific qualities of confinement. The house was the house she and Robert had lived in for years, solid, familiar, full of the particular texture of a life that had been lived in it a long time. She had her garden, and she had Robert, and she had the same Welsh sky pressing down outside the kitchen window that she had grown up under, the gray and particular sky that had been the ceiling of her entire world before it opened up and became something much larger. She did not, in the standard sense, know what to do with the stillness. Nobody who had been touring for 50 years entirely knew what to do with the stillness. She did not, in the standard sense, know what to do with the stillness. Nobody who had been touring for 50 years entirely knew what to do with the stillness. The house in Wales had a specific quality in those months that she had not previously had occasion to discover, because she had rarely been in it long enough to discover it. It was a working house, always had been. A house that contained a life rather than displaying one, with rooms that had been accumulated over decades rather than designed. Robert's things and her things mixed together in the way that two people's things mix when they have shared space long enough that the possessiveness of objects quietly dissolves. She found rhythms. She always found rhythms. It was one of the things 50 years of touring had trained into her, the ability to structure time in unfamiliar environments. In lockdown Wales, the rhythms were smaller. The garden in the morning, tea at the kitchen table, the news in the afternoon, which she watched for increasingly short periods as the months went on because the news had a quality of repetition that did not improve with exposure. In the evenings, music, her own and other people's. And sometimes, if the evening went long enough, the old songbooks she kept on the shelf in the sitting room, the ones from the early years that contained songs she hadn't sung in decades. She picked up a guitar one night in September. She had not played seriously in years. She played for a while in the kitchen, slowly, the old muscle memory returning with the slightly rusty quality of something retrieved from storage rather than freshly learned. Robert sat in the doorway and listened without comment, which was his way of listening when he liked something. The tour would come back. She was certain of this in the way she was certain of most things that depended on human stubbornness, which was to say, very certain indeed. But it had not come back yet. And the kitchen and the guitar and Robert in the doorway were, for now, what she had, and she was finding that they were not insufficient. The letters had been arriving since March. This was not unusual. Bonnie Tyler had always received letters, more of them than many people assumed. The physical correspondence of an audience that had grown up with her before email existed and had kept writing even after email made writing feel old-fashioned and deliberate. She read them when she could, replied to some, kept others. The ones she kept tended to have a quality she had difficulty defining precisely but recognized immediately. The quality of someone saying something true, without decoration, because they needed to say it and had nowhere else to direct it. During lockdown, the letters came with a different quality, more of them. More urgent in some way she couldn't immediately name. Not desperate exactly, but more direct, more stripped of the usual niceties that people tend to put around the real thing they want to say. People were alone in their houses with their real feelings, and some of them, it turned out, wanted to send those feelings to Bonnie Tyler. Most of the letters mentioned total eclipse of the heart. She expected this. The song was why most people wrote. They wrote about where they had first heard it, about what it meant to them, about weddings and funerals and car journeys and kitchen mornings and every category of private moment in which the song had appeared. These letters were warm, and she was grateful for every one of them, and she answered as many as she could manage, in her own hand, on the small notepad she kept on the kitchen table for the purpose. But the letter that arrived on a Tuesday in October was different from the others. She knew it was different before she had finished the first paragraph, and she knew it would stay with her long after most of the others had been filed away. The letter was handwritten. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the handwriting itself. Not neat, not the careful cursive of someone writing a considered piece of correspondence, but the looser, slightly uneven hand of someone who had written quickly, in a state of feeling rather than thought, and had not gone back to revise it. The paper was ordinary, a sheet torn from what appeared to be a notebook, folded twice to fit the envelope. The writer was a woman in her late 50s. She did not give her name immediately. It appeared at the bottom of the letter, first name only, in the same quick handwriting as the rest. She wrote from somewhere in the north of England, a detail she mentioned in passing without specifying further. She had been alone for 7 months, she wrote. Not alone in the lockdown sense, which was the aloneness of temporary enforced proximity to the people one normally escaped for a few hours each day, but alone in the older and simpler sense, alone in her house. On her own, no partner, no family nearby. The kind of alone that the pandemic had sharpened rather than created. She had listened to Total Eclipse of the Heart on a night in March, the early weeks when the strangeness of everything was still new enough to be frightening rather than tedious. She had not put it on deliberately. It had come up on a playlist, uninvited, the algorithm delivering it in the arbitrary way algorithms deliver things. And she had sat in her kitchen at 11 at night and listened to the whole 6 minutes and 58 seconds. She did not explain in the letter exactly what had happened during those 6 minutes and 58 seconds. She did not try to analyze why the song did what it did to her, or theorize about what quality of voice or arrangement or lyric made it land the way it landed. She simply wrote, "I felt less alone." Which doesn't make any sense because I was still alone. But that's what happened. Then she had written the letter. She had not, she wrote at the bottom, expected anyone to read it. She was writing it the same way she had put it on the playlist, because she needed to, and because there was nowhere else to put it. Bonnie Tyler read the letter twice, the first time quickly, standing at the kitchen table still in the coat she'd worn to collect the post from the gate. The second time slowly, seated, with a cup of tea that cooled beside her unnoticed while she read. She had received thousands of letters about the song. She had read accounts of what it had meant to people across 40 years. The weddings and the losses and the road trips and the late nights and the private moments she would never have imagined when she recorded it in 2 takes in New York in 1982. She was not surprised by the song's capacity to reach people. She had stopped being surprised by that capacity a very long time ago, sometime in the mid-1980s when the evidence had become simply too consistent to contest. But this letter, this specific letter, on this specific Tuesday in October 2020, reached her differently. Perhaps it was the handwriting, the unguarded quality of someone writing in a hurry because the feeling wouldn't wait for neatness. Perhaps it was the line about not expecting anyone to read it. Perhaps it was something about the specific, precise strangeness of the year. All of them alone, each in their own way, and the song connecting a woman in Wales to a woman in the north of England across 7 months of isolation in a way that made the distance seem both exactly what it was and simultaneously beside the point. She put the letter down. She looked out the kitchen window at the gray Welsh sky. Then she picked up her telephone. She found the phone number through her management. This was not entirely simple. The woman had given a first name and a general location, no number, no email. She had not expected a reply, which meant she had not provided the means of one. But Bonnie Tyler's management were thorough people, and the combination of a name and a postcode that could be inferred from the postmark was enough, and the number was found within a day. She called on a Wednesday afternoon. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, slightly cautious, the weariness of someone who does not recognize the number and in the current climate answers anyway because it might be important. "Hello?" "Hello," Bonnie Tyler said. "Is that Margaret?" She used the first name from the letter, the only name she had. A pause. "Yes, it's Bonnie Tyler," she said. "I read your letter." The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough to suggest that this sentence had not, in any version of events that Margaret had imagined, been something she expected to hear on a Wednesday afternoon in October 2020. When she spoke again, her voice was different. "I didn't put a number in," she said finally. "I didn't think." "I know. Bonnie Tyler said. My people are persistent. A beat. I wanted to say thank you for writing it. What came next was not dramatic, because the things that matter most rarely are. It was a telephone conversation between two women, one of them in Wales and one of them in the north of England, about what it feels like to be alone and about what music does when that feeling arrives. It lasted perhaps 20 minutes. Neither of them afterward could have given a precise account of everything that was said. What Bonnie Tyler remembered most clearly, when she thought about it afterward, was not anything she had said. It was something Margaret had said, near the end of the call, in the same unguarded way she had written the letter. I kept thinking, Margaret said, that you must have known something when you recorded it, about what it would feel like to need it. Bonnie Tyler considered this. She thought about the winter of 1982, the Power Station studio in New York, Jim Steinman at the piano, the musicians arranged around the room, the 64-track desk. She thought about walking in and being handed the song and learning it at the piano beside him in real time with no demo. She thought about take two, the one they kept. 6 minutes and 58 seconds of singing it as though the words were tearing her apart, because Steinman had asked her to, because the song required it, because the voice, that ruined, impossible, entirely itself voice, was capable of exactly that kind of commitment. She had known nothing in that studio about what the song would eventually become. She had known that it was large, Jim's songs were always large, and that it was asking something of her, and that she had given it what it asked. But she had not known about the 1,000 kitchens and the 1,003 in the mornings, and the 1,000 moments of driving alone on a motorway with the radio unexpectedly loud. She had not known about the woman in the north of England who would put it on by accident in March 2020 and sit at her kitchen table and feel, for 6 minutes and 58 seconds, less alone. She had known nothing in that studio about what the song would eventually become. She had known that it was large. Jim's songs were always large, and that it was asking something of her, and that she had given it what it asked. But she had not known about the 1,000 kitchens and the 1,003 in the mornings and the 1,000 moments of driving alone on a motorway with the radio unexpectedly loud. She had not known about the woman in the north of England who would put it on by accident in March 2020 and sit at her kitchen table and feel for 6 minutes and 58 seconds, less alone. She thought, briefly, about Steinman, about his apartment in New York a year before the recording, the 2 songs he had played her on a test of sorts, Credence and Blue Oyster Cult, watching her face to see if she understood what great music felt like. She had understood. He had agreed to work with her. And what had come of it was this, a song that had now been in the world for 38 years, finding its way into the Tuesday evenings of people who hadn't been born when it was made. Jim had died in April 2021. That was still ahead of her, as she sat in the kitchen in October 2020 with the letter in front of her. She did not know yet that she would lose him, but she thought about him now as she often thought about him when the song came up. The specific gratitude of having met once in a career someone who had written something worthy of what her voice could do. She owed him a great deal. She had always known that. The woman in the north of England had just given her one more reason to know it. I didn't know anything, Bonnie Tyler said honestly. I just sang it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That's what I thought, she said. That's why it works. It was the kind of answer that sounds simple and isn't. And Bonnie Tyler sat with it for a long time after the call ended. She put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table in the particular quiet of a Welsh afternoon in October. Outside, the garden was the garden, the same grass and the same wall and the same gray-green hills in the distance that had been there since before any of this and would be there long after. Robert came in from somewhere in the house, the quiet domestic movement of someone who has shared a house with another person for nearly 50 years and has developed, across all those years, an accurate sense of when that person needs company and when they need the room. He set a cup of tea beside her without asking. She thanked him without looking up. She was thinking about the answer she had given, which had surprised her slightly by being true in a way she hadn't fully understood before she said it. I just sang it. That was the whole of it. That was what she had done in 1982 and what she had been doing ever since, on every stage and in every room and through every iteration of the music industry's changing opinion of where she fit. She had just sung it. Each time. as if the first time and the 10,000th time and every time between were the same event, which in some way she was beginning to understand they were. The song had done the rest. The song had gone out into the world and found the people who needed it, in their kitchens and their cars and their 3 in the mornings, and given them whatever it gave them. The particular, nameless, necessary feeling that music produces in people who are ready for it. She had not arranged this. She had not planned it or managed it or curated it. She had simply provided the voice, and the voice had provided everything the voice was capable of, and the song had done the rest on its own terms. 40 years of singing the same song, and a woman in the north of England had just explained it to her in one sentence. 40 years of singing the same song, and a woman in the north of England had just explained it to her in one sentence. She thought about this in the days after the call. Not obsessively. She was not a person who worried at things when they had already resolved themselves into clarity, but with the particular quality of attention she gave to things she wanted to understand fully before she filed them away. The idea that a singer could not know what a song would become. The idea that the knowing was not required, that you could walk into a room, open your mouth, give the song everything it was asking for, and then let it go out into the world to become whatever it needed to become without you. That the singer was, in some fundamental sense, not the point. A necessary instrument, yes. An irreplaceable one, certainly. No other voice would have made that song what it had become. She was clear-eyed enough to know that. But not the architect of what it meant. Not the curator of what it did to people. Simply the place where the voice and the song met, briefly, and produced something that then went on without either of them. She had spent 40 years being asked what the song meant. She had answered the question hundreds of times in interviews and press junkets and radio programs and late-night conversations after shows, always with the same honest uncertainty. She meant it when she sang it. She knew it was large. She knew it did something to people, but what it meant, the precise content of the thing, she had never been entirely sure she could define. It had always been slightly larger than any definition she could put around it. Margaret's sentence had given her, unexpectedly, the closest thing to a definition she had ever received. I felt less alone, which doesn't make any sense, because I was still alone. But that's what happened. That was what the song did. It did not solve anything. It did not change the conditions of anyone's life. It arrived in a kitchen at 11 at night and sat with someone for 6 minutes and 58 seconds, and then went on to the next track on the playlist. And the person in the kitchen was still alone, and the world was still in lockdown, and nothing about the external situation had changed. And yet something had shifted. The aloneness had become, briefly, a shared aloneness, which was the precise difference between loneliness and solitude, between isolation and privacy, between being cut off from the world and choosing for a moment to be still. She had given that to Margaret without knowing she was giving it. Margaret had sent it back to her, without knowing she was sending it, in an envelope on a Tuesday in October. Bonnie Tyler wrote back to Margaret the following week. A proper letter this time, handwritten, on good paper without hurry. She did not say much that hadn't already been said on the phone. She said she was glad the letter had come, and that she had meant it when she said thank you, and that she hoped the autumn would ease, and that the song would keep being there on the playlist when it was needed. She signed it with her name. Not the name the world had given her. Just the name she had always been. The tour had not come back yet. The stages were still dark. The sound trucks were still parked in their yards. But somewhere in the north of England, a woman had a letter on her kitchen table, in the handwriting of someone who had spent 50 years singing to rooms full of strangers and had never, in all of that time, stopped meaning it. That was not nothing. In October 2020, with the world in its particular suspended silence, it was rather a great deal. Bonnie Tyler died on the 9th of July 2026 at the age of 75. The letters that arrived in the days following her death came from every country the song had ever reached, which was nearly all of them. Many of them began the same way. I want to tell you what the song did for me. Most of them would never be read, but they arrived in their thousands because the people who sent them needed to put it somewhere. The same impulse that had brought a woman in the north of England to tear a page from a notebook on a night in March 2020, in the dark, when the album was still months away from ending. I felt less alone, which doesn't make any sense because I was still alone. But that's what happened. Bonnie Tyler had read that sentence and picked up the telephone. Because that was who she was. Not the name on the album sleeve or the voice on the platform or the #1 single on the wall, but the person who, when someone told her the truth, knew enough to answer it. She just sang it. And for 40 years the world kept needing her to.